Woo, the man of tomorrow is here. Don't you worry, don't you fret. And are you going to get more Sovereign Tech? You better believe it. We're going to have to do another double load this weekend. It's just schedule, you know? When you're the hardest working man in anarchy. Boy, I haven't said that one in a long time. But when you are, you know, these are the things that happen. Anyway, I mean, understand, Sovereign Tech's my life, baby. What can I say? So, all right. We've got a few questions to get into in this one. But again, you will be getting your double load of Sovereign Tech coming up. Don't you worry. Just got a cybersecurity conference to get to tomorrow. Got a whole ton of shit to do. Man, it never stops, but I'm still basically the happiest man alive. So regardless, we got a great tech question to get into. Very interesting one. Got a gaming question to get into. I actually got another gaming question that it was my brother, Robin Freebeard, my co-host, on various Zomia ONE episodes. He actually asked a question on the Podbean app that I'm going to talk about on a Gaming Grid episode proper, but I got another question about gaming that's clearly in reference to the recent Gaming Grid episode that is clearly meant for a Q&A, so we're getting into it here in your Zomia ONE Underground Wednesday Q&A. Then we also, again, we have a tech question to get into, and then we have a question, well, amazingly, that has to do with music. Very, very excited to talk about that. Really... Well, I do an album of the week every week on this show, and we have a doozy this week as well. But it's pretty rare. Well, I think I've gotten questions about metal and stuff like this, but not a whole ton. So I'm glad to get that kind of question. Keep those things coming. Of course, you can email me at bbs@sovereigntech.com. You can ask me on Twitter. You can DM me there, just at SovereignTech. Or, in fact, the way that I got this first question, we'll get right into it. Or... you can actually just contact me right on Telegram. It's just at Sovereign, SOVRYN, of course. And why don't we go ahead, let's just break into it. Let's get into this Q&A. Let's do this dance. We got 3 big questions, and I think there's big conversations to really have around each. So let's do it. So again, this came in from Telegram, and here we go. You've convinced me to buy a Switch, man. I didn't go with not a Switch man. He's calling me man. I didn't go with the Switch Lite, not because, of course, we're talking about the Nintendo Switch. I didn't go with the Switch Lite, not because I didn't want a portable one, but because I wanted the kickstand and Joy-Cons. All right, let's stop on that for a second. So this is so you can connect Joy-Cons, which are the 2 controllers that sit on the left and right of a standard Nintendo Switch, not the Switch Lite. The Switch Lite, you can't attach the controllers on it. Some see that as a benefit because you get a proper D-pad, but whatever, you can switch Joy-Cons. Some of them can have proper D-pads if you want, on a standard Switch anyway. But regardless of all that, this was a criticism, and it's one I didn't mention and I should have, is that it doesn't seem like, I really don't see a good reason why they couldn't have put a kickstand on the Switch Lite. I really don't. And a lot of people have brought that up. Because, now granted, you're losing about an inch of screen, right? Between the standard Switch, as far as like what's, built in the center with the screen that's built, the touch screen that's built into it. You're losing about an inch of screen between the standard Switch and the Switch Lite. And definitely, if you are looking, and as we read on in this question, you'll see why, this is definitely meant for 2 people playing together, which rock on. I think that's so sweet. Yeah, I mean, the standard Switch is really the way to go, but you still could technically do it with a Switch Lite, and I do think it's not a big deal. I'm not going to take points off of the Switch Lite for this because I get it. Like, its entire ethos is to be a personal device, even though you can do multiplayer on it. There's really no good reason why you couldn't put, why you couldn't put the stand on there. That, in my opinion, that just doesn't make any sense why they didn't. And other reviewers have brought that up, and it's a fair criticism to bring up. But regardless, for what you're going for, like I said, you're clearly looking for a sitting side by side with somebody and doing some multiplayer, okay? Or, what they call it, couch multiplayer now, even if you're not on the couch. Yeah, I think the standard Switch is really the way to go if that's the sort of thing that, that you want to do. You can do it with a Switch Lite. Again, you just buy separate Joy-Cons. Like I have the stand that I talked about in my review from Hori that will, let the Switch Lite sit up and you can actually plug in 2 USB peripherals like GameCube controllers or whatever into it, so you could do multiplayer, local multiplayer, couch multiplayer. But yeah, I hear you. And you don't need the dock, right? Like, even if you wanted the standard Switch for this purpose, you don't need the dock. You can just fucking toss the dock, you know, and you could just charge it with a separate cord. So yeah, I think that's totally legit. Anyway, let's read on. Actually, I'll start again and we'll just keep going. You've convinced me to buy a Switch, man. I didn't go with the Switch Lite, not because I didn't want a portable one, but because I wanted the kickstand and Joy-Cons. I've got to agree with you, this thing is a fun beast, and my girlfriend and I, who are backpacking Asia with only 1 bag apiece. Woo! 1 bag in it. That's what I'm talking about, all right. Through Asia. Fuck yes, I love that. Let's see, with only 1 bag apiece, are really enjoying it since we don't usually have a TV unless we're at an Airbnb. I know this is a broad question, but as a Nintendo aficionado, well, thank you. How do you think they keep pulling off such magical devices? Stay free in the Stasi states, my friend. You still have the best podcast in the world. I don't want a world without it. Well, like I said earlier, don't worry. You're never going to have a world without Sovereign Tech. And as I've said that many times. Regardless of what my schedule ever looks like, I'm always going to do Sovereign Tech. You're always going to get the same amount of Sovereign Tech. You know, I love doing it. It's my life. You know, it's my main contribution to this thing called the human condition, I guess. So anyway, but I'm honored. I don't know if I'm the best podcast in the world, but you're not the first to say that. So I'm really always honored by people in Stasi states. That's hilarious. I haven't heard that in a while. Okay, so let's talk about this. So first off, Nintendo has not always made magical devices, right? They've always made, like with the Switch Lite, they've always done iterations, and not all of these iterations have been successful. Like, I think the Switch Lite is a successful iteration of the Nintendo Switch. And it is just an iteration. Again, they started that whole trend. Nintendo did, you know, back in the NES days, right? Where you had the top-loading NES that came out later on, halfway through that or not even halfway, like 3/4 into that generation. You even had, a lot of people don't even know this thing existed. There was a leaner and meaner Super Nintendo that was released by Nintendo. That, yeah, I mean, it was smaller. I mean, it's a very odd-looking thing. Neither of those really did well. In fact, there's genuine problems, like with the NES top loader. Even though I like the design, I remember I had one, and I don't know, I thought it was slick, and I thought the controllers were better, but because they're more dog bone, they felt more like the Super Nintendo controllers. But anyway, you know, those didn't always work. Most of the iterations of the Game Boy, those worked. I mean, every Game Boy, other than maybe the Game Boy Micro, which I thought was kind of pointless because it only played Game Boy Advance games, has really been, I mean, I would argue that's been a magical device. I mean, depending upon, here's the problem, is that most people, with these iterations especially, it's tough to say, what's an original Game Boy and what's not, because of these iterations, and Nintendo will play with these fuzzy numbers. And look, the whole tech world does it. Apple does it and everything, where they'll say, well, the Game Boy is the most successful or has the largest game library of all time. Yeah, but are you counting, there's times where Nintendo, when they talk about the Game Boy, they're talking about, the Game Boy to the Game Boy Pocket, pre-Game Boy Color. And then there's times when they're talking about Game Boy being wildly successful and they're counting everything up to the Game Boy Advance. I mean, so it's very weird with that. But anyway, I mean, Nintendo, to say all of this, not everything. Well, okay, so here's an interesting case. The GameCube. The GameCube, I think, is a magical device. I think it's an absolutely magical device. And it's interesting, that never had an iteration. There was never another GameCube. I mean, you could play GameCube games on the Wii, right? Even the Wii had an iteration. It was ridiculous, but it had one. I guess the Wii U never did. They never really bothered, unless I missed something there. I mean, I just never messed with the Wii U, so I can't really say, as much as I kind of kept up with what was getting released for it. But yeah, the GameCube, I think, talk about magical devices and great design. Understand that while the GameCube is not seen as one of Nintendo's shining moments, certainly not like the Nintendo Wii or the Nintendo Switch, The GameCube was a wild success as a console. It just didn't sell as much as a PS2. But then, and again, this is where you get into funny numbers, but it's arguable, based on some stats, that the PlayStation 2 is actually the best-selling game system of all time. Here's the rub. I don't think the PlayStation 2 sold because everybody was a fucking gamer. If the things that made everybody a gamer were the Nintendo Wii, which, if you go by other stats, is actually the best-selling game system of all time, and was, undoubtedly a success for Nintendo, but it's because it was accessible and grandma was finally playing video games, right? I know there's people who say that they're not gamers and they don't play video games and that they're proud of it. Okay, fine, you're not. I know you're out there. But let's be clear here. Most people, just like most people do watch TV and movies, most people now are gamers as well. And what really contributed to that was the Nintendo Wii. It was also, obviously, smartphones had something to do with that. And I would dare say, like, Facebook. With like Mafia Wars and those farming games and Candy Crush or whatever, like those kind of stupid Facebook games, those are the things that really kind of turned everybody into where they got used to playing games wherever they happen to be, and it became a convenient thing, and then everybody becomes a gamer once it becomes convenient. Okay. So at the time, in that generation, was that the 6th generation, I think, of consoles? With the GameCube, the original Xbox, and the PS2, you could count the Dreamcast in that, but the PS2 kind of not blew that out of the water. Here's the thing. The PS2 sold well, and I've said this before, I'm not saying anything new, but the PS2 sold well because it was a DVD player. It had great games. And look, I even said it in my review for the Switch Lite, or in that episode. I said, I love my PlayStation 2. You're going to have to pry it from my cold fucking dead hands. I'm never giving that thing up. It's that great of a gaming system and it has games on it that are probably never going to get re-released, that are essential games, in my opinion, for a multitude of reasons. Not only in how they're attached to franchises, but just like that they're like these wacky, great games, and the fact that it can also play a lot of PlayStation 1 games that are even more rare. Okay? So I'm not knocking the PlayStation 2. I'm not saying it wasn't a great gaming system. I'm saying that at the time, not everybody was a gamer. And the reason that the PlayStation 2 sold so damn well is because arguably it was the cheapest fucking DVD player out there, but also it gave your kid a gaming system. So it was a much more, even though, it was multi-hundreds of dollars at whatever stage in its, generation, it was totally worth the asking price because everybody got to watch DVDs and the kids got to play games. So everybody won with that. So that skews just how well Microsoft's Xbox, the original Xbox, did, and how well the GameCube did. With gamers, the GameCube, again, wild fucking hit. With hardcore gamers who had been playing since like the 80s and 90s, the GameCube was huge. Now, it's interesting that there's no iteration to the GameCube, and you want to know why I think that is? And in fact, this is going to point at how does Nintendo make magical devices? I think that this was a, dare I say, magical form factor. You couldn't improve upon it. I've said, not counting the Commodore 64, that's an easy answer for a lot of people. But my favorite computer of all time was the Mac G4 Cube from Apple. A gorgeous, gorgeous little computer. It's never been topped. Design-wise, I don't think it will ever be topped. It is just a stunning piece of engineering and, frankly, art. It is a masterpiece of electronics. I love the Mac G4 Cube. Now, the GameCube, very similar in design. There's just a brilliance to that package. And that design and that look. And when it's all inclusive and can do so much, there was no way you were going to iterate on it. And they basically just put in great GameCube functionality into the Wii because, granted, I think another thing that sold the PlayStation 2 was that it could play PlayStation 1 games, right? Like it was backwards compatible. That was a very new thing that I have to give Sony credit for. Very much for trend setting. Again, depending on how Nintendo wants to classify the Game Boy family, you could say maybe Nintendo had it in mind first, but not really. And, well, you could say Sega did it first as well. Anyway, in the mainstream, not in like niche cases, okay, so Sony really set the stage for the idea of your consoles being backwards compatible. And Nintendo definitely took to that, and they were probably very hopeful that, well, shit, if this Wii does well, we can maybe get them to look at our back catalog of GameCube games and they could jump on that and we could make money off of those and blah, blah, blah. And I think that largely worked, but there was no real improving on the GameCube itself. It was a brilliant design as is. Now, again, this is going to speak to the Switch, okay? Because I don't think the Switch Lite and the standard Switch are that different of an animal, and I'll describe why in a second here. So, but also understand that Nintendo has had failures, because this is part 2 of this. You have the Virtual Boy, which was way ahead of its time, very advanced in what it did, another piece of brilliant engineering, but nobody took to it. And there are very obvious reasons. Too heavy. The batteries wouldn't last forever. You had to change, 20 AA batteries, or whatever the fuck was in that thing. It was insane. There are real, things where it's not convenient, right? That's the key. It was not convenient to play, and like even in the instructions, it said you could only play for like 30 minutes, and you just go, well, what the fuck? But then, arguably, some of those concepts would get put into the Nintendo 3DS, and the Nintendo 3DS would be a wild success by anybody's metric. And I would dare argue, frankly, I still consider it the better system than the Switch. I don't know if I'm not going to like say that it's the Dreamcast or anything like that as far as being best console of all time, but fuck, is that a impressive little package. Another bit of great engineering, but hard-earned, hard-learned by Nintendo with some failures that they've had over time. So Nintendo doesn't always pull off a magical device, but what they do, even with, like I said, hard-earned, hard-learned lessons on what you can and can't do and what works in consumer technology, Nintendo has absolutely been ahead of the curve on just about every technological development. They have innovated right and left. Whether the innovation took off at the time or not is not the point. The point is that they literally, more so than any tech giant just about, or any other company, they implement so many technologies first, way ahead of everybody else. I would argue, you could easily say they started the mobile revolution with the Game Boy. You can't stress it enough how much that company innovates. And that even with flubs, overall, yes, they do have magical devices and they have incredible, design engineering. So these 2 points, okay, that, they innovate, okay, and not just innovate, but like they're wildly ahead of the curve. And they do make such great form factors. Leads to this. Now I'm also not the first one to bring this up, but certainly everybody has kind of said it. Or, plenty of people, well, I don't think many people realize it because they're still thinking of the Game Boy or the DS or the 3DS and so on. Let's just call this the Nintendo Switch is, now you could say, well, it's basically just like it's a Wii U controller with the console in it. Yes, that's not unfair. But the Nintendo Switch is really just a tablet. It's Nintendo's iPad. That's all this is. It's a tablet with 2 controllers on each side. Like you're talking about the Joy-Cons. Take those Joy-Cons off, you have a tablet in your hand. Touchscreen and all. Balls to bone. So, now, in fact, if you remember, Steve Jobs called the iPad a magical device, if you recall. Now, the tablet is a great form factor. I talked about this years ago, and it's been a disappointment that, like, the Android space and other industry, Microsoft's jumping on it, and certainly more so with, they had that fucking dual screen folding phone, which... Who are they copying with that? DS. Which the DS was even copying itself within Nintendo with the Game & Watch games and classic digital games that also did that dual screen that could... Well, anyway. So, Nintendo doing dual screens is old school. Again, this is a point I can't drive home enough to you. Nintendo are the genuine innovators in, let's just say, consumer technology. Not in the enterprise space, obviously. Not when it comes to servers. We brought that point up. Not when it comes to a lot of that. But as far as consumer technology shit that people are holding in their hands, be it the controller or whatever, or shit that people are putting their eyes on, Nintendo has innovated left and right ahead of just about everybody. Okay? Though nobody could see YouTube coming. I mean, yes, they could, but you get my point. So, yeah, I mean, Microsoft's clearly, like, it's funny because when you watch that Microsoft event from today, I mean, it's like it's like Panay pulled out a 3DS. But anyway, yeah, let's just call it here. Nintendo released a tablet with the Nintendo Switch. But here's the rub, okay? And I think this is why, and I didn't get it until I really, like, spent time with one and, played with it, had it in my hands. The reason why everybody just wants everything to be on their Switch is because, whether consciously or unconsciously, and I would argue probably for a lot of them it's unconsciously, they don't realize that it is basically a tablet. And that the tablet form factor, which, let's talk about the tablet here, okay, started way back in the 70s, right, with Alan Kay, with the Dynabook, which has still never come to fruition, but, basically the iPad was the Dynabook. I mean, even Alan Kay has talked about that. If you don't know the history of the Dynabook, please go read about that. It's still a dream that I think is worthwhile. But effectively, I mean, Alan Kay, who is a brilliant computer scientist, and I would argue, probably a damn fine engineer, he knew what he was developing when he came up with the Dynabook, when he came up with the concept that this is something that people would really be attracted to, and it would just feel natural. And it's similar to, like, what Steve Jobs even said, where you don't have a stylus, you just use your finger and all this. I mean, Nintendo, like, tapped into all of this stuff. And whether or not, like, Game & Watch games from Nintendo, again, we're talking 40 years ago, whether or not they were inspired by Alan Kay with the Dynabook, I mean, I don't know. And I don't think anybody can really speak to that. But regardless, okay, Nintendo knows what they're doing. Again, touchscreens have been around since the 80s. I mean, they've just been fucking around. They've been around forever. It's just now that there's, like, a use for them, right? They're convenient. So now it's a thing that people have. So, but anyway, Nintendo basically took the tablet design and they made a tablet. And the real winner here, though, is that, let's call it, as natural as touching, as using a touchscreen interface feels, there are a lot of times in how we are used to interacting with software, or in the case of the Switch, games, where it doesn't feel precise enough. It's not enough to what we're used to. And so what did Nintendo do? They did what basically I said the mobile industry has needed to do for a long time, and there have been attempts, but they've all failed. And that is, they put great controls and attach them to a touchscreen. This is what mobile gaming needs. And this is why, when people have been saying over the past decade, oh, mobile gaming is where it's at, I don't necessarily think they're wrong. I don't think they've been wrong. The part that's wrong is that gaming's history and gaming's future, and its present even, which requires at many times very precise controls, can't thrive on just a touchscreen. So you need something mobile that has great controls, and that's all the Nintendo Switch is. It's a tablet with great controls. And that's why I think everybody wants, everything that they can imagine to be on there, because, I mean, they're basically treating it like a computer. Not that that's new for Nintendo either, right, Famicom? But part of the reason I was also confident in saying that, everybody might end up with a Switch Lite in their hands is because of that very fact, that it is the convenient way to play games. Again, you can play it anywhere. It's an all-in-one package. The screen, the controls, everything are there. Or everything's there. But the fact is, it has great controls, unlike a smartphone. So, I think that people owning a smartphone and a Switch Lite, absolutely, I think that could be a reality. I mean, Nintendo could come out with something where, again, like I talked about, I kind of hinted at this or said it more directly, during my Switch Lite review that Nintendo could do Switch Online. They could make that available on every screen, every smartphone, computer, whatever on the planet, and you pay a subscription fee, right? Like you already do. And then they already kind of do this, where they sell you specific controllers designed to work with Switch Online games. And then they could sell you the controls that only work with Switch Online. They could do that and then like have it strap in your smartphone or something like that. I mean, the issue there is, there's not a common code base with a lot of mobile games. And also there's not a common like size or style, especially for Android phones, unlike with Apple. But Nintendo doesn't really need to worry about that because if it's all being done through their servers, through Switch Online, they don't have to worry about the code base. And you just make an adjustable dock of some kind. So, I mean, that's a direction that things can go. And look, the industry's already starting to copy Nintendo because Nintendo finally put it out there, point blank, that this is what it takes to either get the next generation of gamers or to give people gaming the way that they want it, especially in a very busy world. Like Razer came out with, effectively, the company Razer, that does gaming laptops. Razer effectively has released a couple times over now the same thing. They released a Switch that basically runs Windows. The thing is, it's stupidly huge, okay, and that's not really going to work, and it doesn't have, I don't think it has very good battery life. But they did the same thing. They put a screen in between a couple of controllers. And, I mean, it looks exactly like the Switch, but it is that magical design where it is that convenient way of playing games, right? But it has great controls that nobody's really been able to deliver on yet. Okay, now with Nintendo, I mean, this is far more an attractive proposition. I don't even think Razer can really pull this off because with Nintendo, they have complete control of the mapping of the controls themselves, the buttons and so on. As to where with the Windows PC, I mean, yeah, the Xbox controller design layout has been somewhat standardized, but you all know as well as I do, not exactly. And I think a lot of people that are still holding on, and we'll get into this in a future gaming grid based on Rob's question, but a lot of people are still holding on to Windows PCs for gaming. Frankly, it's to play games from the past 30 years. Not so much to play modern ones. And those games from the past 30 years, unless there's like an HD remaster, aren't amenable with more modern controls. So how does Nintendo keep pulling this off? It's because they've been in this game. They've been in the consumer electronics game. Frankly, and I mean like the handheld, convenient consumer electronics game. Okay, wherever the consumer's eyes are at the time, be it on the TV, mobile, whatever. They have been ahead of that curve. They've been ahead of Microsoft. They've been ahead of Apple. Remember, Nintendo's been around 130 years. Okay? They're ahead of everybody. And they've learned all of these lessons. And they finally, they create their perfect packages and they know exactly what people are, after all that time, I think they've learned what people look for. And now, I mean, it's somewhat even scarier because now they have all the metrics that they collect, all the metadata they collect from the Nintendo Switch. And we know they collect it. Like, I mean, they're really going to know what people do now. So, I mean, it's just going to be even more. Well, again, I kind of feel like the Switch is the last proper console that will come out of Nintendo. I think they're going to do that Switch TV, like I mentioned. I really think, and I haven't heard anybody else talking about that, but I think that's just a no-brainer on their part. I think they'll do those sorts of things, but the Switch generation of console, or the Switch family of consoles, I think is going to be Nintendo's last. But they're learning, like how to engage with their audience post-console with a lot of this metadata that they're collecting. But again, the Switch is really the culmination of just decades of Nintendo research and innovation. And I've said this before on Sovereign Tech, Nintendo is the true innovator in the tech space. They are the true innovator, none of the other companies. I said that years ago, before the Switch even existed. I told you that. They're the ones that are always ahead of the curve, and they're always innovating. Unlike Apple, who doesn't innovate jack shit anymore. They are the ones that have always innovated. And in whatever fashion, I'm sure they'll continue to do so. So anyway, that's really cool. By the way, I love the fact that you're like... there's something very romantic, I gotta tell you. There's something romantic about, you're just one bagging around the world where you just have like one bag and you don't carry anything else with you and you're backpacking or hiking or whatever around Asia. That's pretty amazing. But then when you and your gal just want to, rock it out, you just pull out the Nintendo Switch and you have a little game night. I think that's fucking wonderful. Good on you. I mean, good on you. And it's certainly easy enough to slide into a bag. That's for sure. So anyway, that's great. Now let's go into our next question here. Boy, are we going to be able to get into the last one? I might have to save the music question for a future episode. I think I might do that. But anyway, let's get into the tech question here. Stallion, on these very Q&As, I've heard you understand and defend the use of a smartphone, but on Twitter, and yeah, I know I'm hard on Twitter. But on Twitter and on Sovereign Tech, I'm hearing you bash them and, quote, throw them into a lake of fire, end quote. Believe it or not, I actually agree with you that all smartphones should go into a lake of fire, but really, that's just not possible. As a businessman yourself, I don't think I have to explain why in the modern, or I don't have to explain why in the modern world. So to my question, do you at least mitigate your use of a smartphone? How do you live with a smartphone and hate it at the same time? Damn good question. I mean, we have had this conversation. There was a couple episodes where I was covering, the use of the smartphone today. I mean, especially since we're, really 12 years deep into, since the iPhone first came out, right, in 2007. And that's really when smartphones became a thing that everybody wanted, because Apple used to make magical devices. And, then, yeah, it's what happens when you hand things over to the supply guys. That's where Nintendo's still winning, is they listen to, the developers. They listen to the people, to their artists. And Nintendo has very real artists and, Miyamoto and so on. And that's really, that's what matters. I mean, Japan's good about that in many ways anyway. That's why, gaming and anime and a lot of other things are a big deal there. But, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, Apple, fuck them. So that said, yeah, how do you live with a smartphone and hate it at the same time? Okay, here's the deal. And I'll try and keep this brief. Yes, smartphone is doing far more harm than good. Far more harm than good. I am absolutely not a conspiracy theorist in saying this. I am not the only tech journalist saying this. In fact, Mike Elgin, who is talk about a guy who's been writing, a tech journalist that's been around the block. He has been around forever. And he gets, Computer World. He's on Twitter. I mean, he's all over the place. Love Mike Elgin. He has openly stated to millions of people that, or at least hundreds of thousands, that, yeah, the smartphone is a net negative. Like the negatives far outweigh the positives of what a smartphone does. He said that. Okay, so don't look at me like I'm some kind of, I could be conspiratorial about it. And in fact, in an upcoming Sovereign Tech, we're going to talk about the horseshit that Amazon and Apple are pulling, where they can, whatever, especially Amazon, they could track you anywhere. I know that sounds like, well, of course they can. No, you don't understand how bad it is. And it's all powered by the smartphone. We're at it. We've reached a new level, okay, of being tracked with those two companies especially. There's a story around that. We'll get into that in the near future. So yeah, okay. Now, so how do you live with it and hate it? Okay, yeah, it's a net negative. That's the initial premise we're coming from with this. However, part of why I think that people, even if you could convince them, even if you could make the best case, and I don't think it's hard, even if you could make the greatest case ever, that the smartphone is, if you want to use these terms, is downright evil. If you wanted to come out and say that, why aren't people going to give it up? Why? Because, like we were talking about earlier, they're convenient. And the other thing is, and they're easy to use too. There's that. But they do so much. Like, as soon as you start having the conversation of, I'm tired of these smartphones, why don't we go to a dumb phone? Why don't we do this? then you realize, shit, I have to buy a GPS device, because suddenly you've become reliant upon that. And it's not only that you've become reliant upon the GPS, like cities are literally taking down infrastructure of signs to where you really can't get around as easily as you used to without a GPS device. There's also the fact that people have, I mean, and I've said this is the most insidious fucking thing, is that Google has, you know, now they give you reasons like police reporting, you know, where there's a speed trap, how long is it going to take you to get there, what's the speed limit where you're at. There's a lot of these all this other information that's not just about where you're trying to get to and having those directions, but they give you a lot of reasons to just have your GPS on all the time. And people are doing it. Okay, so you start to deconstruct, holy shit, oh, but then this is how I do my banking, this is how I do this is how I do that, blah, blah, blah. And eventually you realize like that so much of what you're doing today is attached to the smartphone. This is how you watch YouTube. This is how you listen to podcasts. This is how you listen to your music, even if you're streaming it off of your Plex server. This is how you listen to audiobooks off of Audible, whatever. There's a million things that you suddenly realize that you do on this thing. And so for a lot of people, they go, well, fucking A, I can't give this thing up. This is where everything is. And that's kind of a problem. Well, it's not just kind of a problem. It's a problem. Here's the deal. And this is how I mitigate it. Okay. Because let's talk about the net negatives. All that sounds like positives, right? Here's the net negatives. The biggest problem with the smartphone is that it makes you always available. And I know this, and it's my number one complaint. I know this better than anybody, okay? Because I have clients all around the world contacting me all the time, and I feel like, or I've felt like, I am always on, and I have no hours where like I'm technically allowed to, or where I'm expected, or where I could at least have a reasonable expectation of not having, you know, of not being able to be in contact. I mean, there's people who like, they expect me to call them when I'm taking a shit. I'm not kidding. When I'm on the fucking toilet. That's how bad that is. Now, kind of have to retrain society on that, but really we have to retrain society on just about everything. I mean, it's amazing how quickly people adapted to smartphones being in our lives. But there's a solution. Okay? Now, really, that part of always being in communication, that's really only an issue if you are more of a remote worker or a digital nomad, kind of like people who had the question about the Switch earlier. I mean, otherwise, if you're at work, like your boss knows where you are, you know, he can come get you. You don't have to be available on Telegram or Wire or Signal or whatever, you know, at those stages. It's just not necessary. It's more so when you are like either a business owner or if you are, you know, if you're a remote worker, digital nomad, things like this. But a lot of us are, especially those of us who would be, you know, would heavily use a lot of the fun things that people can do, or educational even, that people can do on a smartphone. So there's a solution around all this, and that is basically what makes it challenging, like why you get convinced and why you get tricked into always being available is that because even when you're not working, maybe you're wanting to listen to an audiobook. Maybe you do that while you're working, but whatever. Maybe you want to listen to an audiobook. Maybe you want to watch a YouTube video. Maybe you want to play a game on that thing. Maybe you want to listen to music. Maybe you're at the gym even working out. Okay, and this is a problem for me too, because I go to the gym, almost 2 hours every day. You know, maybe you're doing all of that, right? And so the thing is that because your media consumption device or your good time is from the same device that people can always reach you on, there's the problem. So what do we have to do? Did you get the answer yet? Yeah, you got to separate that. How and before you say, oh, I don't want to carry around 2 devices, I'm not telling you to. Is the answer 2 devices? Yes. Do you have to spend more money? I bet you don't. Here's the trick. Here's what I do. How do I mitigate this? Here's how I mitigate this. Because this is a real fucking problem. I mean, it got to the point, like for me, Okay, I can appreciate it. And this is part of why I speak so much against smartphones, because like it's reprogramming us. And in a very real way, like we're becoming slaves to these fucking things. I would sleep next to it in my bed. When I would get up at night, you know, I'd use it as, say, a flashlight to get around, to get to the bathroom. That way I don't have to turn on the light and, you know, well, anyway, there's more around that, but you might have to be someone that does that sort of thing. Maybe I'd use it, take a quick look at notifications while I'm going to the bathroom in the middle of the night. No, I'm not saying that that's healthy at all. But then, you know, when you have clients all around the world, they're on a different clock, and they might send you an email, you know, at 3 a.m. Eastern. It's not 3 a.m. for them, but it is for you. You're in the middle of the night saying blah, 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 blah. You know, they have some kind of fire that needs to be put out or whatever, right? And then you can't go back to sleep, not because of the light of the smartphone, even though there's something to be said about that, not because of any of that horseshit, but like you're having a heart attack because, like, you know, you have a client that's freaking out and either you can't go back to sleep because you got to go take care of the client or whatever. I mean, it's crazy. And this goes beyond business. I'm sure in parts of your personal life, this sort of thing is happening too. This really should not be fucking possible. And there's a conversation to have around remote working and all that really, you know, has to be had at some point, because that's becoming its own problem. But as much as there's advantages to that, and it's not at the point of net negative yet, but I wonder. Regardless, you know, I still want that flashlight next to me, right? But then, you know, do you have the concerns around, oh, the 4G beam is coming down all the time and, you know, and whatever's everywhere and fuck, it's frying my brain. I hear those sorts of things from people as well. Okay, well, and this might come up again when we actually talk about SimJacker on Sovereign Tech. Here's the real solution. You probably, let's just get to it. You probably have other smartphones, unless you threw them away. You know, there are a few people I know of who have held on to smartphones for years, and bravo to them, where they're using the same smartphone for the past 4 or 5 years or something. That's fucking awesome. Like, kudos to you for so many reasons. Okay. But I think a lot of us go through smartphones every couple of years, a year. Hell, I know some of us that go through them every 6 months. You probably have some spare smartphones lying around. So what you're going to do is, okay, and I'll list potential caveats because this is something I ran into as well. To mitigate this fucking smartphone, take one of those old smartphones and basically turn it into an iPod, turn it into a very advanced MP3 player. In fact, you could even do GPS if you wanted, because you could do offline maps with OSM right? And it would just use the GPS. Might not be as well done, or it might not work as well as, say, Google Maps does. Okay, but that's a possibility that you could do. So then you don't even have to buy another GPS device. But you would just basically install, you know, if it's Android, right? You'd have the Play Store on there. You'd wipe the thing clean. You're to get apps off of the Play Store, you're going to have to sign in. I can talk about an alternative to that as well. But you don't put a SIM card in it. You can have the Wi-Fi on, but you can even turn that off periodically. But you use this thing as an MP3 player. And so, like, especially if you're more of a remote worker or you're going to the gym or whatever, leave the fucking phone somewhere else. Plugged in if you want. Have it set aside. Okay? And then, you know, just carry around your MP3 player with you. You know, and these things have Bluetooth and all that. You can hook up your Bluetooth headphones to it. You can have the Audible app on there. You can put Power Amp on there. You can have the Plex server on there. Like, if you're going to the gym, I mean, most gyms have Wi-Fi. There's plenty of places that have Wi-Fi. Or if you want, you know, hopefully it's a smartphone that has an SD card slot. Put a huge fucking ass micro SD card in the back of it and put all your music on there locally. Trust me, that is something. I have gotten so tired of load times, even with like Plex and like my NAS, that I just, you know, that's a fucking enough. Like, when I'm away from home, there's a select amount of songs. I don't need every goddamn song with me. I just don't. And I have millions of songs in my own private personal MP3 collection. Okay. But yeah, 128 gig SD card. Oh yeah. That can handle like the bulk of what I'd possibly want to listen to, either while I'm on the road or while I am, while I'm going to the gym or, walking around, even hell, if I was walking around the house. But, if I was going on a big trip of some kind where maybe I think I would need the random song or something like that, well, of course, then I'm bringing my smartphone with me, right? But then that's a big trip. That's a very different situation. So it's really nice because now I can just go around. No one's going to communicate with me on this thing, but it has everything I'm used to. YouTube, Audible, my MP3s, go down the fucking list. PDFs. I mean, if I want to use it as an ebook reader, I could do that, even though I have a Kindle Oasis that I use for that. You could just do everything with this. Now, let me give you like part of the rub with this thing that'll be a little bit of an issue. So if you're like me and, with Android, if you have a Google account, which who the fuck of us doesn't, unfortunately. So I have the Google Advanced Protection Program activated, which I recommend every Sovereign Tech listener do, and have been recommending it, for years, ever since it came out, that we should all be using it because it's free. There's no reason not to. There's a little bit of a challenge with that. And that is, so with the Google Advanced Protection Program, you have to have a hardware second factor authenticator. I use a YubiKey. Google has their Titan keys, of course, which those use Bluetooth, which that won't run into this problem. But you run into the challenge of, if you have, say you're using an older smartphone for this, it might not have NFC. That's the problem. Okay, or if it's like a throwaway smartphone, it might not have NFC. So you could run into that issue if you have the Google Advanced Protection Program set up. Basically, I'm saying you won't be able to log into your Google account with that. However, the good part of that is that maybe you could create a new Google account, and then, what you're doing on that isn't attached to it. And then you could still download stuff from the Play Store. You just might have to repurchase some apps, okay, to work with that. The other options are, of course, if you run into this, is that you could run, or maybe you're going to put Lineage OS on it or something. You could put the Amazon App Store on instead, which is about the only way to get Audible on your smartphone, which is one of the main things you'd want to do with this, to get, or to get Audible, shall we say, on your new MP3 player, right? It's about the only way to do that outside of the Play Store, unless you have an iPod. Then you're already good to go with all this. But anyway, so the Amazon App Store might be something to look at, but boy, that App Store, it is still fucking laughable. There's so many things missing, and there's versions of apps that are literally 2-3 years old, that are somehow still there. I wouldn't install them for the life of me. But of course, then there's also F-Droid, which has a lot of interesting options for podcast apps and things like this. This is a solution. This is a way to mitigate the smartphone in your life, is to detach your entertainment from this shackle of communication. And that's really what you're doing with it. Okay. So, it's not so far as tossing the smartphone into a lake of fire, but it's putting it in its place. And frankly, having it, a smartphone without a SIM card in it, that's a fairly more secure device, especially if you do Lineage OS instead of sticking with your stock Android. So that's a route to go. But that's really that's one of the better solutions. I mean, I talk about wearing a fitness band that can send you notifications so you're not always looking at your smartphone, but then it's still giving you those notifications. So if you want to cut those out of your life, again, because of the net negative that the smartphone is, and it's going to be awesome once everybody else realizes this, because eventually I think they're going to. When they realize it, you're going to be ahead of the curve, and you can tell them what to do. You can tell them to take out their smartphone, or to take out the SIM card out of their smartphone and just start stomping on it. Of course, maybe that's why eSIM is becoming such a thing, because they're terrified people are going to start doing that. I don't know, but regardless, there you have that. So that's one of the ways that I mitigate that. If you have other questions on that, I guess I could get into some other tricks. I think it's worthwhile to explore. I'd love to hear yours. Just email me at bbs@sovereigntech.com to do so. So we're not going to be able to get into the music question that I had, but we've already been going a good while here, so that's fine. But as far as your album of the week, got a quick one here for you. Eclipse, the band Eclipse. I believe they're out of Sweden. In fact, I have played their music. I've used it in Sovereign Universe content. They had an album called Armageddonize. I think that came out in 2011. That was just dynamite. Well, they had a new album come out called Paradigm. It's their sound. It's kind of if you listen to Heat or Wet, or that's so funny. All those, anyway, like those band names are so similar. If you've listened to those kind of bands, you know that kind of like hard rock sound, that has a little bit of raunch to it, but like clean, and, you know, has a power. It's not exactly power metal. I mean, it is, but I don't want to call it that because it's not Flights of Fancy. If you know Eclipse, you know their sound, you're in for a great time with Paradigm. You want to check it out. Mary Lee, I think, is the name of the song in there. I thought that was the best track. The opening, Viva La Victoria, I thought was really solid too. So this is an album you want to check out. If you've heard, I've done Eclipse for albums of the week in the past. This is just another, I mean, it's not their best. Armageddonize, I would say, is their best, but it's pretty damn good. So check it out. Anyway, that'll be it for your Wednesday Q&A. Woo, a lot more content to come out. October is going to be a busy month. You just wait and see. And I will see all of you on the other side.